Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. I wanted to first and foremost thank you, audio listeners, because you are the reason why I started New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union, because you're more local than most of my other listeners or followers on Rumble. The 2A has been beaten up, especially in New Mexico in the last month, 2 months, and it continues to be beaten up. And it looks like House Bill 9 is going to the floor, and it'll probably be passed. That's a safe storage type thing. I kind of knew that was going to be a concession. The House Bill 101, which is the ban on assault weapons ban, cleared committee, so it's up for a vote in the Senate committees now. Be vigilant. Get out there. There are currently some stuff going on in room 309 at 1:30 for anti-2A bills in New Mexico. But what I was inspired by to make this audio-only podcast for my listeners that started this was to remind myself that why I started this. So some 3 years ago, when the COVID stuff started hitting, I really got into listening to and watching podcasts, listening to audio podcasts, but watching video podcasts or vlogs or VODs, I think is what they're called now. I don't know the terminology, because I really think it's hilarious. They're all based on the same principle, or podcast. But I wanted to, if this ever hit someone like Tim Pool, to understand how much of an impact those podcasts actually had on me. During the 3 years stuff with the COVID, I don't have a lot of friends that live in the area anymore. Most of them have either gotten married or moved out. Not like that we could get around to talk to them anyway or see them, because during the COVID stuff, we were all kind of stuck at home, including work. And during that time, I was working for a K-12 district in northwest New Mexico, and I started questioning the mission. I'm very mission-oriented about what I do in my life, and my mission to that point was to I'm just going to say it, do cool shit for kids. But how I did it was enabling adults to have the technology that they could use the tools to do cool stuff for kids. Fast forward to where I am now. I realized that the pressures that are being put on K-12 aren't going away. If you know what I'm talking about, all the CRT, SEL stuff, all that stuff's coming home to roost. And I realized in the last 3 months that people that I was convinced would have a spine and say no, actually have no spine at all. And when I say that, I'm not talking about my former boss's boss, I'm talking about my former boss. When rubber meets the road and you've been called out, you have two options. You can either pick it up and take it and show them that you're not going to do it, or you can do exactly what they tell you to do and conform. Now, being the rugged individual I have always been, that's kind of why I don't hang out with a lot of people. That was an easy choice for me, especially after doing some praying and thinking about feeling at peace when that happened. And while I may be struggling right now till my retirement payout so I can start my business, it has been eye-opening to see how burnt out I was in the K-12 space. Fast forward again to today, where one of my favorite podcasters, and there is some emotion there tied to it, because during the most difficult parts of my life, when my father was passing, and then later when my mother was passing, Tim Pool's show was there. And it gave me something to focus on that I've always been interested in, which is politics. I got into watching the news at the age of 5 or 6 because of my dad. My dad worked two jobs, and he would wake me up in the early morning to watch the news with him, and he said it was important to know what was going on in the world. I wonder what point in my life, or my dad's life, he realized that the news was full of crap. Because I'm positive he did, especially towards the end of life. And I feel really bad for Tim specifically, because in the culture war, which most of us wouldn't bother worrying about the culture war stuff, he's been beaten up a lot by people that he once considered friends. And it seems like his friends have always turncoated and used him to get to a higher plane of what they were doing or to get payout. Now, if you've ever seen some of the tweets I put out, which is Spawn082 on Twitter, or you follow New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union on Facebook, you may have seen me, compliment the man or say, hey man, I'm working on getting my podcast big enough to go one day be on his show. It's more so because I want the man to understand what happened to me. I don't know him from Adam. He don't know me from anything. But what's important here is to realize that our influence is not where we think it is. And that's why it's important that someone starts standing up to people that are doing unjust things to us. And as I've always been exposed to firearms, and I'm not an expert, but people in my area like to think I am. I am a default safe gun guy that people can talk to, whether they want to talk about a ban or whether they want to talk about training or they just want to talk about cool stuff with guns. And why I say I'm safe for that is I won't necessarily give it to you full barrels before you get what you want to say out. Eventually I will. Once you're done, especially if you're about taking freedoms away from the American people, I'm not for that. And that's why K-12 alignment didn't work for me anymore. In the news, it's now coming out that you're starting to see a superintendent from Alamogordo. Alamogordo, New Mexico is kind of similar to where I used to work, Aztec, and in that it's rural. Not so much that it's the same demographics as socio-political, but it's pretty close. And in that, the superintendent came out of Alamogordo and said that they're basically introducing CRT and SEL under covert means. They're assembling their team, and that's what they're doing to bypass what the parents and what their board knows what's going on. Now, I don't know that that is happening where I used to work, but I definitely could see it happening because they're all going to the same conferences and the same stuff to get on the same board, the same playing field, so to speak. And I'm not down with that. But it really hit home to hear Tim, last night and today think about or say how many people stood behind him. He helped elevate him just to be knifed in the back. And I wanted to, on my humble podcast, to again thank you all, you audio guys that listened to me for the last year or two that I've been on. I know I'm at over 200 episodes, and I don't have a huge huge audience, but my audience seems to be loyal because my numbers are always consistent. And on Rumble, we've grown 10 times in a week. So I'm still trying to figure out whether it's the politics that draws people or the cool stuff with guns. And why do I think guns are cool? Okay. Well, first was the connection I have with my father. But my father ingrained those connections even deeper by teaching me history. There was always a lesson, and I've spoken about this, that went along with the firearms we used in our family. Specifically, I learned a lot about K98s, Model 70 Winchesters, lever action Model 94s, infilled, SML infills. Military surplus rifles were a big thing because they were affordable. But with that, I learned a lot from my uncles and my dad about what it meant to get to that point to make that gun. That's why Forgotten Weapons is a huge thing for me too. And why I like a lot of the gun tubers in the space, because they actually do what my dad did. They explain the reasons, they tear apart the gun, they let you get down in the nitty gritty. And while I've never been super athletic, I've always done very well in the shooting sports because of my passion. And that's what I've noticed about people in the 2A, is the passion that drives them to do more. And while I would love for this to be my sole means of support, I know that I will have to keep my business going, or my side business that I have. That's how I see it, even though it's probably my primary business, going to keep me sustained until such a time that I have a decent audience. But let's get back to the guns, why they're cool. Name one other thing as a young man that is instantly interesting, or a young lady. You're doing something that could potentially kill you, but most of the time, if you're not an idiot, it won't. That's exhilarating. That's cool. You know, if you've ever got into golf, you know, you're hitting a ball to try to hit a hole that's hundreds of yards away, and you're doing it with a set of tools and your ability to try to get it there. The same thing happens in the 2A. I see it more as like high-tech archery. We're trying to get that projectile to hit that same sweet spot all the time if you're into precision shooting. But what the other part of it is that you get out, and this community is one of the best communities you could be in. And when I say that, I have never heard anybody say anything about gays, straight, nothing. None of the culture war issues, no one cares. In the 2A, it's always been, you like guns? Cool, what do you like? Now, I've always heard people talk about the pores because quality matters in the 2A, and if you end up having to compromise and get something cheaper, there is a reason why it's cheaper. But there's some avenue in the 2A for everyone. Whether you're just a shooter, just an admirer, just a collector, a tactical type person. I can tell you that my tastes have evolved from being just a casual shooter kind of collector, and kind of a historian at that, more so to the tactical side. And it wasn't because I saw a need to go out and, take on the American government. I think that would be stupid. But I do think that the fear that brings to the American government is necessary. The reason why they don't kick down doors and try to go after the American people is they know there is quite literally a gun behind every blade of grass in the United States. And that's a safety check on overreach. It should be a hell of a lot more of a safety check because our government tends to do a lot of things that we don't agree with. And when I say we, I mean the people don't agree with. And I get tired of everything else just like everyone else does. These issues, these political issues never seem to go away, especially in the 2A. They keep trying to wear it down because they've actually came out and said outright this year and in the last couple of years, the whole goal of the gun rights laws or the prohibition laws that they're trying to put down are to strip you of your rights. There's a New Jersey state rep, I believe, or the governor, or either one, it's one of their politicians that came out outright and said, no, we outright know that our gun laws will have no effect on criminals. We're going after the law-abiding citizen. And that's what's terrifying to me, is that these politicians are ignoring us. The reason they exist is to serve us. And they're not understanding what the hell they're doing. They're towing these stupid ideas because there's a ton of uninformed people that think that, gun violence is more rampant than it ever has been. I think violence is more rampant than it ever has been, and I think the numbers show it there. Because in the last few years, we've seen the expansion of crime. And why have we seen the expansion of crime? I honestly think we've all lost our mind a little bit after COVID, because you can't lock some people down, or people in general down, for 3 years almost, and especially in New Mexico, or 2.5 years in New Mexico, without having consequences. We've seen that with kids. When I was in K-12, they were talking about how to address the skill gap that was produced because of this. But it also made me think about how many people actually stood up and said no, and myself included, to the unjust laws and edicts of the tiny midget woman of Michelle Grisham. Now, I don't mean, I mean, I know dwarfs. Anthony's a cool cat. I've known him since high school. He would laugh at what I just said, because smack that woman around. She's giving us a bad name. I don't like the lady because very early on during the COVID stuff, there was a chance my dad's cancer could have been caught sooner. So I know I have a bias towards the woman. But I also know that the woman has done more damage to New Mexico than any other politician on earth. And I've spoke about this because of her changes that she's had to make at the cabinet level, because people are just leaving. I wonder why more people in K-12, which I know there are a lot of people in K-12 that disagree with administration in general. Most of them are married towards retirement. The retirement that New Mexico gives is outstanding if you can stomach it for as long as you can. I couldn't. That's why I am not working in K-12 anymore. There is a line, like I said, in the sand that I had to draw. I drew it, and I'm good with it. I'm paying the repercussions for it. I could have been a conformist to shut my mouth, and I'd still be making probably about $100K a year just making sure IT stuff works. I don't think people in K-12 are appreciated anymore. And I don't think that working for the government is the way out of this. I think what we need to do is start holding people to the fire and actually reflecting our values out in the world. To that end, what are your values? Like I said, you're shooting, high-tech archery is what the 2A is. But it's not just that. It's familial bonds. My sons, my son and my daughter, actually. Sons and my daughter. I think they have a connection to the 2A because of me, and I think that it's reflected in their values. They're all ruggedly independent, even my youngest, who likes to be, well, let's just be honest. My son is not as social as he once was, and I think K-12 had a lot to do with that, especially with COVID. And I'm not so sure that the greater good that existed in K-12 exists anymore, especially with more and more people in the admin level coming out and saying no. We agree with the mob. No, you should be agreeing with the populace that is paying you to take care of their kids. And that is where we start getting into what's cool. How do we get people to our side? And it's be reasoned. Find out the facts. It's annoying to talk to a leftist who knows nothing about guns, who's trying to tell me that they need to ban assault rifles or high-cap magazines. Number one, there is no such thing as a high-cap magazine, in my opinion. And I think the evidence supports my thought process there, is that when they're billed on their website or when you purchase a new firearm, what kind of magazine comes with that? That means that's kind of standard now. So shut up. The other thing that goes with the language barrier is the gymnastics. In the last, again, it seems to correspond with 3 years. It seems that there's a group of people that like to manipulate language to get their power. And to them, there is nothing but power. And I don't agree with that at all. I never agreed with letting the oppressors, whoever they were, run roughshod over anyone and their rights. So the reason why I think the 2A is so damn cool is it puts that speed bump out for them to go, wait a minute, we can't go get after everyone, because if we do, we're going to die. I hope it never gets to that point. But I don't know that I trust any politician, whether it's my sheriff, who was supposed to be the gatekeeper for law enforcement and the highest law enforcement agent of the county. Because when the chips get, when it gets real, they're more so willing to conform to what the governor is wanting to do because of funding. And right is right, as my former big boss used to say. And I believe that wholeheartedly. That's what's so disheartening about the current situation in the 2A and the politics, is because it seems there's so many turncoats that won't actually stand up for what they believe in. And they'll pay lip service to things like, well, if it's not right, if it's not good for this or good for that, we won't do it. And then when the rubber meets the road, they'll back down because them's the rules. I've never been that type of person. I never will be that type of person. I say it often to my friends in real life, whether it's with my shield or on it, that's how I live my life. Guns are cool. I would love to spend all time just talking about guns, about what I think is cool, and get input from my audience, because I seriously believe that interaction is what makes the 2A so cool. That's why gun shows actually do matter. And on this Friday, where most people are kind of just doing their thing and not really checking into podcasts or anything else, I've reserved it for my audio-only guys and ladies, so that you can understand that I haven't lost you. I still cherish you, even though there's probably like 5 to 10 of you guys versus the 112 or so on Rumble, and neither one of those numbers are super great if you want to break into this type of thing for a living. But it shows growth. But this is how I started this, and how it was originally intended was to be an audio-only podcast. But distribution and, well, modern technology means people are looking for video. I hope someone like Tim gets a pat on the back today, and even Jeremy from the Quartering. And those are culture, politics type things that if you're into the podcast world, they may mean more to you now. Just so that they understand that there are people that aren't grifting to try to get in their DMs, to try to get on their show just to get prowess. If I made it onto Tim's show, I wanted to tell him, and I will tell him one day, because it's a goal, and I usually make my goals. To tell him how much he's meant during some of the darkest times of my life. To tell him how much of an inspiration he, David Mills, my son, Eric July were for me to try to get out and do something like this, because this is totally outside of my wheelhouse. Normally, I'm one of those people that would prefer being a wallflower. I don't speak a lot in day-to-day life. But when I do, I've been told it matters. And that's what's forced me to, I don't say forced me, I've enjoyed it. It's the first time I've ever found myself being able to get ideas and thoughts out and try to make some sort of spaghetti stick to the wall when it comes to government overreach that maybe has some sort of impact. That is a big deal for me. After my father and my mother's passing, legacy kind of matters. I know what my legacy is for my family and for my kids. But what's the other legacy we leave? I know I'm about to do something entirely, something I never thought I would do, but I know many in my family have done. And that's start a business of my own. And when that's ready, I'll announce what that is and what we're doing and where we're going. And I may even spin up a separate podcast for that business to document what we've had to do as we've earned our licks and hopefully gained customer support and gained a foothold in the industries that we're going into. Like, share, subscribe. Most importantly, be great.